Welcome to But Is It Feminist, the podcast that supports women's rights and women's wrongs. I am your host, Amanda Hernandez, sociologist by training, hater by nature. Today, we are going to explore the stars, the cosmos, and ourselves. Today, we are going where many an iced coffee sipping feminist before us has gone, and if we are lucky, many more will follow. Today, we are talking about astrology, our zodiac signs. And full disclosure up front, I am a Gemini. Do with that information what you will. Many people give me very skeptical looks when they learn I'm a Gemini. They look at me through new eyes. I feel like maybe they feel like they can't trust me. It's fine. It's fine. But today we are having a conversation about this with my unofficial official guide to all things astrology, Meagan Solomon. Meagan has taught me so much about astrology that probably seems like really beginner to the more initiated, the more informed. I have a very clear memory, and I even pulled it up now. We were at the Tropical Smoothie Cafe, and
Yes.
Meagan said something to the effect of like, I know you've heard of the big three, but have you heard of the big six? And I was like, say less. Let me pull out my laptop and take notes. So she has helped me better understand my chart, my placements, a true scholar, a true teacher. Meagan is an assistant professor of feminist studies at Southwestern University and probably like one of the coolest people I know. She is a founding member of the Malflora Collective, a community project that includes zines and her own podcast that works to preserve the lives and legacies of Latin lesbians. Meagan, thank you so much for being here. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, especially to talk about one of my favorite things, as you know, astrology. I too have a fond memory of us discussing astrology around the Tropical Smoothie Cafe table.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the introduction. So I'm Meagan. My pronouns are she, her. In addition to being a professor in feminist studies, I am also a cat mom of two. Their names are Cleo and Teddy, very big cat lady. And I am a big fan of astrology. It seems to come into many conversations of mine, both personally and professionally. And we're going to dig into more how I got into astrology, but it is something that has been part of my life since I was young. I'm a big lover of literature. My background is in literature, but I also just love reading for fun. Currently in a book club where we are finishing reading Emma Perez's Forgetting the Alamo, which is a really good book. Yes. And yeah, I feel like those are the main things I would share about myself. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm obviously wildly excited to get into the meat of our conversation, but I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked everybody else, which is how do you define feminism and how did you personally come to a feminist consciousness?
Yes, I'm excited to hear what other folks have to say on this because I think there are a lot of different approaches to feminism and different definitions. But for me, at its core, feminism is an ideology, a movement, and a daily practice that involves advocacy for all oppressed peoples, animals, and land. And I'm intentional to include both animals and land because my own feminism has also grounded me in a larger ethos of collective liberation that extends beyond the human.
Mm.
And this is something that has really been informed by Indigenous feminist practices in particular. And I think the root of oppression through the lens of feminism is heteropatriarchy. So I don't think we can talk about or define feminism without identifying heteropatriarchy as maybe the primary root of struggle that feminists are fighting against and working to transform. But I also think we can't fully contend with feminism without also understanding the larger roots. So thinking about settler colonialism and its longstanding impact, the ways that settler colonialism, and we are in a US context, so this is particularly prevalent here, but thinking about how settler colonialism has defined gender in very narrow ways and perpetuated a binary that is not actually consistent with the diversity or complexity of humanity or the larger natural world. I also think it's important to identify settler colonialism and white supremacy as the primary roots of oppression in the way that they have shaped and defined a hierarchy around humanity or society more broadly, particularly in ways that privilege men, and especially cisgender, white, heterosexual men, even more so those who are wealthy, Christian, and abled. So there are a lot of layers to feminism that, in my own personal philosophy, as well as my practice as a scholar of feminist studies, that I think are important to unpack, especially beyond maybe the more surface level understanding of feminism that many people have, which is that it's just about equality of two sexes, which I think is maybe a longstanding definition of feminism that I think deserves more fleshing out and complexity, because one, there are more than two sexes, of course. Two, I think it's much more than just equality to men, especially in a system where I personally have learned to challenge and also encourage my students to challenge the standards of equality in general. There's the common analogy that people say about having a seat at a table. You know, like women have fought to have a seat at this table. And something that I challenge my students and myself to think about is, you know, what is that table? Do we want to have a seat there, or do we want to completely transform and upend the context of equality that we are often told to strive toward? And I'm thinking about like what we call often girl boss feminism, the very capitalist approach to feminism that is hyperfixated on economic power, which is not to say that's not important to a certain degree, because we do have to survive in this capitalist society, right? But I think my priorities as a feminist are not so much that as they are having a daily practice of building stronger relations with my community, with the land, with all of the natural world in ways that are rooted in compassion, mutuality, interconnectedness, and collective care, with the goal of collective liberation for all. A very long answer, but I think this is my general approach.
Yeah, and it makes sense too. Like, as you were talking, I was like, I know why every single student in that Intro to Fem Studies class comes out being like, yes, I know when they've taken your class.
I love that.
You also made me think of, so one of the first semesters I had at my 4-year university, I took Intro to Women's Studies, and it was called Decolonial Feminist Methodologies. And I remember signing up for that course being like, I have no idea what any of those words mean. Like, oh no. But in that class specifically, the professor used a very similar analogy that sticks with me. She said, feminism isn't about wanting a piece of the pie, it's about wanting cake. And I was like, that speaks to me on a personal level as someone who doesn't like pie, like, but I do love cake. Okay, so tell us a little bit about how you got into astrology.
Yes. So, as I alluded to in my introduction, it has been a part of my life since I was young. And this is because I was raised by a single mom, a single teen mom, who was very into alternative forms of spirituality. And that included astrology. I am a lesbian. My mom is also a lesbian. And as we're going to dig into this conversation, we'll talk more about the connections between astrology and queerness. But I had a somewhat unorthodox upbringing, and part of that included my mom talking a lot about astrology when I was young, and it really shaped my interest. She had books on astrology in the house. She actually was inspired by her older brother, my uncle Christian, who passed away in 1997, sadly, at the age of 27. But he was also queer, and he was also into alternative forms of spirituality, including astrology. And so it's kind of this generational queer practice in my family, I would say. And my family on my mom's side was raised Catholic. And so to pursue kind of an alternative spiritual route was not common. But they did, and that definitely informed my interest. I think I probably have taken it further than at least my mom did in the level of astrology that I've immersed myself in. But yeah, it's been around since I was young in terms of its presence in my life. And from a young age, I remember my mom had my birth chart done. As I mentioned, we had books about astrology that I would peruse. And it's always something that fascinated me. I did not grow up particularly religious, even though I have religious people in my family, my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family. And I think, like many people searching for some kind of spiritual home, I did end up finding that in astrology in a lot of ways. And I think I took interest in it because, well, one, as a Pisces, and I also have a Pisces stellium. And for those who are listening who don't know what that means, when you have three or more signs in your chart, three or more of the same sign in your chart, that's called a stellium. And I have a Pisces stellium. So that means I have a lot of Pisces energy. Pisces are a water sign. They are known for being very imaginative, creative, psychic, even, and intuitive and spiritual. And so I feel like I was naturally called to astrology. And as an introspective teen, I was really into reading about astrology because it felt like it gave language to some of my experience and those around me. And I think that's what brings a lot of people to it. I do think there's a misconception that a lot of people have, and it tends to be people who reject astrology without getting to know it. But I think a lot of people perceive astrology as some kind of set of mandates or like fortune telling. And that's not what it is. It's not a practice that is going to tell you what to do, nor is it going to necessarily predict specific elements of your future, but it does provide a general compass to get to know yourself better and to get to know others better. And because I've always been an introspective and I would say sensitive person, very interested in knowing myself and others on a deeper level, I was called to study it more and make it a part of my life. So yeah, a little bit about my background with astrology. I will say I am certainly not an expert. I would consider myself still a beginner. It's very complex. It's also a very ancient belief system and practice. And there are different branches of astrology, even. There are regional approaches to astrology. I mean, there's a lot of complexity that I'm not even privy to fully. So I would say my level is still pretty novice, but still something I care deeply about and continue to learn more about.
So as you know, I'm a sociologist of religion, and listening to you articulate all of that makes so much sense because it's a tool to help you understand the world and your place in it. And that's what all religions, faith, spiritual practices do. And so the fact that maybe if you feel excluded or maybe like this specific practice doesn't really speak to you, something else might, something like this. So I was just like, fascinating. I hadn't put that together.
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna very quickly, and I say quickly. Well, I don't know what tangents we might go off on, but okay. So through your tutoring, I have learned
Not the tutoring.
under your tutelage, I have discerned on the internet that okay. So hold on, I have my little sticky here. Okay, my sun sign is Gemini. That's my main sign. Gemini moon, Pisces rising. And so we've had conversations. So Geminis, to my knowledge, is like the twin. So people who embody duality fairly easily. It's not manipulative. Kidding. They're like very chatty, often perceived as like charming, charismatic, really like to collect knowledge and people. And I remember like I've always been really interested, but I have not deep dived. But I remember like as a teenager going to the Barnes and Noble, like down the street from our apartment, and just like sitting in the occult section and like reading all the like witch books, and I'm like, damn, why hasn't that spell worked? Like,
So me.
I remember as a teenager, and again, because like I'm a young girl, I definitely was like socialized and accepted my socialization as a girl. And like I was in like Christian spaces. So I was getting all these like, you have to be pure, you have to be good. And like I tried to do that. It didn't really work out so well for me. And at the same time, I was just like, but I'm also a Gemini. Like, am I allowed to be charming and charismatic? I feel like I am. And it made me feel like not in Christian spaces, I was supposed to be like very demure, very quiet. And I felt like astrology kind of was like, well, it's in my nature. Like I can't help it if the boys like me. Like um and then I had apparently done my chart wrong at some point because there's like so many websites and I probably just entered information wrong. But I thought I was Gemini, 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 but I had done it again. And my rising was Pisces. And your rising sign is how people perceive you. And like I wrote down this exact phrase you had said. It said, you said, it is your externalized energy. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because people do perceive me. It's not that I'm not caring, but like people perceive me in a way that I don't always feel like I actually am. And so I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like that people would see me as this more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just that people see me different than I feel that I actually am, or how I'm actually feeling or experiencing the world myself. So that was a lot of fun. But what are your big three?
So, as I mentioned, I'm a Pisces sun, and your sun sign is the one that most people know based on your birthday. And for those who may not be as familiar, I'll just give like a brief description of what they signify. So, your sun sign is your general personality. I do identify very much with being a Pisces. My moon is Aquarius, and your moon rules over your emotions. So it can signify, so traits of that sign could connect with how you express yourself emotionally. And then my rising is Aries. So as you just described, this is the energy you project outward or how people tend to perceive you. So the traits associated with your rising sign would apply in that context. So I am a water. So it's water, air, and fire in my big three. I don't have a lot of earth in my chart, and it shows, I fear.
Okay, you have to unpack
What
that
that
for
means.
me.
Okay, so I don't want to reduce anything to just simple descriptions. So take this all with a grain of salt. But water signs tend to be more outwardly expressive emotionally. They tend to be regarded as sensitive, intuitive, imaginative, feeling forward. Air signs tend to be associated with thinking and intellect and curiosity and having dynamic personalities and often being maybe more social. Fire signs tend to be associated with being very passionate, very bright and bubbly in their personalities, adventurous, having like grandiose dreams and ideas. And earth signs tend to be associated with being grounded, often logical, maybe more organized. But as I mentioned, these are all very simplified descriptions. And this doesn't mean that if you are one of these signs as your sun sign, or if you have more than one of these elements in your chart, that you don't, have any of the other traits of the other ones. That's not what that means. It just means these tend to be general traits that people with these elements carry. And in my experience, I have found this to be pretty true. And so when I said I don't have any earth in my chart really, and it shows, it's just I'm not necessarily the most logical, grounded person. I tend to be more emotional and feelings forward. And I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing entirely. I do think it's a quality of mine that I've learned to embrace, that I feel things very deeply. But I do wish I had some more earth to bring me back to reality sometimes, or to help me navigate certain things with more of a rational sense of mind. But I guess another thing I'll add there quickly too is a lot of people who know their sun sign may not know the other elements of their chart, and they may dismiss astrology because they may think like, oh, I've read about my zodiac sign and I don't relate to it at all. And I think that's somewhat common, but I think that's often because people don't realize they have an entire chart and that you may have one sign as your sun sign that doesn't show up prominently in any part of your chart, but you may have a lot of the other elements. And so you may relate more with your other placements than your sun sign. So if you're listening and that's you, I would encourage you to look at the rest of your chart and get a reading to get a better sense of all that is influencing you and your personality, and not just the one sign.
I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, I need to pull up my chart because I'm just listening to you. I'm like, I don't know if I have any fire in me because I feel like I sort of just move through the world like I'm doing 2 thumbs up and nodding my head right now. I'm just like, okay, cool. And I'm very much this sort of person who I have developed over the years a journaling practice. I journal every single day, and a lot of this comes from I have to very intentionally think about my emotional world. I have to go, Amanda, you probably had a feeling today. Like let's sit down and think about that. Like I feel like I have to dig my feelings out a lot of the time. Otherwise, I'll just like coast. Okay, hold on. Where is it? What am I looking at here? Okay. Gemini, Pisces. Okay. Mercury's in Taurus, Venus, Gemini, Mars, Cancer, Jupiter, Gemini, Saturn, Capricorn. Oh, second ascendant is in Aries. Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo. I don't know.
You're right, though. You don't have a lot of fire. And your big three, so another element of astrology.
It says fire 0 on, I don't know what I'm looking at there. That makes sense. Okay.
Another thing, and again, I am not an expert, all of the signs also have a modality.
What's that?
So the modalities are fixed, mutable, and cardinal. There are 3 signs in every element, and each of those 3 signs, so for example, water is Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio. Each of those have a different modality. And so cardinal signs are the first of their element in the zodiac, and they are often initiators, perceived as leaders. Fixed signs tend to be more, maybe fixed to their purpose or their interests, maybe more immovable with certain maybe facets of their life. And then mutable signs tend to be more adaptable, fluid, ever-changing. And what's interesting is that both Pisces and Gemini are mutable signs. So the fact that your big 3 is all mutable, I wonder if you identify with feeling adaptable.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I'm very like, I do a lot of mirroring in situations of like, oh, I know who I need to be in this space and I know who I need to be in this space. And I know for some people that can feel like a very taxing thing to do, like emotionally or physically, whatever. But for me, I'm just like, yeah, that's Amanda A and then that's Amanda B. And it doesn't drain me the way that I perceive that it does for other people.
And I would say that is very much a quality of mutable signs. So the fact that you have a lot of mutable energy in your chart, that would coincide. That would make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, and to me, in my mind anyway, that translates very much to like, I feel that I'm able to do that because I'm always consciously or unconsciously reading other people, reading the context, reading the environments I'm in. And because that is where a lot of my energy is going to, I'm not super focused on what I'm experiencing, which is why I have to be like, all those things happened today. Now let's unpack the emotion associated with it. But I had to like, it wasn't until like my early 30s that I was like, oh, that's probably not healthy. You should have feelings too.
And I think this is very consistent with your big 3 being both Gemini and Pisces, because Gemini would likely influence the perceptiveness and observational qualities that you're describing that you have, being very, just perceptive of others around you and analytical. And Pisces would be likely guiding the part of you that reminds you to reflect emotionally, and both of them together would be influencing probably your adaptability in different situations. So I think it's consistent with your astrology.
Look, I agree. And I'm literally like, I feel like I'm always learning so much. It is so funny to me that I was listening to you talk about, you're like, oh, I don't have any earth. I feel like I can see it in this way. And then as you described, I was like, oh, I don't think I got fire. And then I was like, oh, yeah, that's so true. And it's not that I'm not a passionate person. I have passion. I find emotional reaction very, I don't know.
That makes sense. And that's what I want to emphasize too, is it doesn't mean you don't have any of the qualities that are associated with the other signs. It just means you might express it less visibly or just differently. So yes, I don't have a lot of earth in my chart. That doesn't mean I have no logic. It just means I am an emotional girly, and I am not afraid to lead with feeling and emotion. That's just who I am. I'm not the kind of person that can like bottle up my emotions or hide them even. And I would say that's very consistent with my water energy. I have some prominent Aries placements. So my rising is Aries. Aries are a cardinal sign. So they are the first of the fire signs. And their cardinal sign, they tend to be initiators. And as I mentioned, fire tends to be associated with passion. And I would also say like assertiveness and directness. And I feel like it's very true for me, because even though I'm very much like a sensitive, emotional Pisces, like who is in that faculty meeting grabbing the mic? That is me. Like,
and I would just like to say, I love having a front row seat to it. I love watching it. I'm your biggest fan.
Thank you.
Big fan of your work.
Thank you. For those listening, we are both faculty members at the same university. We have these big faculty meetings, and after the administration speaks, we have these microphones where people can go up and ask questions or give comments. And I am very much often on the mic. And I would say that is that is where I feel my Aries energy come through.
You just have questions.
I have questions and comments, and I will say them. And that is my Aries energy through and through. On the downside, so that's another conversation, and I don't know if we have time for it, but there are definitely I don't want to what's the word? I don't want to reinforce any kind of binary and say like good and bad or positive and negative. Consider it more a spectrum. But I can say with every sign, there are stereotypical quote unquote positive traits and quote unquote negative traits. And I think that this is less about good and bad and more about balance. And one of the things that I see astrology as assisting with is navigating that balance and giving us context to understand how we may embody certain characteristics associated with our signs. It gives us information on how to navigate it. So on the one hand, with Aries, I'm like, yes, bad bitch energy, direct, assertive. On the other hand, it can be very like impulsive. So I have to just like navigate that. Or with Pisces energy that I have, I think I appreciate that I can be emotionally in tune and intuitive. On the flip side, sometimes I get into like idealistic daydreaming territory where it pulls me out of the present. And this is where I wish I had more earth, because I'll be maybe even like stressing about the future a lot, because I'm always thinking ahead rather than staying rooted in the present. So these are some of the things like, but I know this about my chart. So it gives me that context to know that this is common for me, and I need to, try to strike a balance. So,
yeah. And going back to like what we were talking about earlier of using these as part of a toolkit in a belief system, like that's a good thing. You do want something like this to not just, what's the word? Like it's not just serving as confirmation bias. Like, oh, that's just who I am. You're like, oh, I can recognize these patterns maybe I have, maybe I need to work with that, or I mean, I think it's again like going back to it being a helpful tool, not that's just who you are, that's the way you're going to be. Can't change it. Like, no, that's not. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not a script. It's a
Mm-hmm.
guide.
Yeah. I'm 100% gonna go read my entire chart again when we log off.
I love that.
I am very online. I have been clocking an ungodly amount of screen time during the summer. Like on Sunday, I get my little alert. It's shameful.
I'm
So
right
like
there with you, though.
I'm on TikTok a lot, I'm on Instagram a lot. And my sense is that astrology is very much embedded in queer culture and identity. And you talked a little bit about this already. And so like I know it's not always the case and it's very possible it's just like my algorithm is giving me this content because of the other content I engage with, but a lot of the astrology or zodiac content I see are from outwardly feminist, femme, gay, or queer creators. And so I'm wondering, why do you think that is?
So I think you started to articulate this in response to me sharing about my background with astrology. And it's that people tend to seek out some kind of belief system or spiritual practice. And I think for queer people, astrology has become a kind of refuge when the more dominant religious practices aren't always, or the way that they are practiced aren't always welcoming or recognize positively
Hmm.
queerness. So as I mentioned earlier, astrology is very ancient and it has been practiced for centuries in different regions of the world in different ways, including within the larger popular religions. So like in Islam, in Judaism, there have been sects or branches of those larger religious and spiritual practices that have included astrology.
Mm-hmm.
However, by and large, the most dominant and popular ways that the traditional religious systems and practices are practiced sometimes reject, or maybe often reject, astrology as heretical, as antithetical to their belief systems and religious practices, and in some cases even frowned upon so much that they're considered like witchcraft in a negative way and
Derogatorily.
derogatorily and dark and demonic.
Yeah.
And I think queer people have a history of being seen in that way as well.
Mm.
And that's not to say that these traditional religious practices or these longstanding religious practices are inherently homophobic, because I personally don't believe that. I
Mm-hmm.
personally believe it is how they are practiced versus the religions themselves. But because that's oftentimes the dominant ways that these religions are practiced exclude queer people, it has left us to kind of maybe seek out alternative methods for finding spiritual connection. And I think for a lot of people, astrology has done that. And I don't think that the patterns you're seeing of queer people being connected to astrology in your algorithm are accidental. I
Mm.
think it over time have become very intertwined. In queer spaces, it's like if you don't know about astrology, that's more uncommon. That's more like surprising, if you don't know. It's become so deeply intertwined with queer culture. And I think I really do think it's connected to the larger experience of being othered and seeking connection in alternative spaces or countercultural or subcultural spaces. However, there have been, astrology is not always subcultural. There have been instances where it has become more commercialized and
Mm.
popularized, and we can definitely get into that. But shall we?
Oh my God. Yes.
Okay, I'm thinking of popular magazines catering toward cis heterosexual women, and I'm thinking of Cosmo, or magazines of that
Yeah.
nature, where they had, and I don't know if Cosmo itself actually had this because I didn't read these magazines, but Cosmo or something similar, I don't know, would have these spreads where it would it would include your zodiac information and horoscopes, but they were written in a way that assumed their readership, which were women, to be heterosexual. Or they would have like little snippets or stories. And I'm using this in past tense, but I'm sure that it happens currently as well.
It must. And I just have to say, like, as you're painting this image for me, I can smell the perfume inserts
Of
from,
the
like,
magazines?
the magazine.
Yes. Oh, you're so right. Yes, that's coming back to me too. But I feel like my mom probably had some of these magazines laying around because I just remember they would be written in a way that's like towards straight women to like understand their straight male partners, or to like, I don't know. It was just deeply embedded in heteronormativity. And so in some ways it's been commercialized or revitalized in a very heteronormative way, even though I think by and large it's still considered a very queer belief system and practice. I'm sorry, hold on. Teddy's getting in a box. He just looks at me like he didn't do something bad. But anyway. So I don't know, like that's something I think about too, is the way it's been. Oh, also, oh my gosh, how did I forget this? Whenever I was growing up, my nana, who was my mom's mom, would I would stay with her a lot, and she would always have her like Mexican TV on, or Spanish language TV on. And there was a show called Corazones, and it was an astrology dating show in Spanish. And I used to watch this with my nana, but it was a heterosexual, like very straight dating show. And they would pair people up based on their astrological signs, like their sun signs. And so that's another, I just remembered that. Like I would watch that with her when I was young. But it was another instance of where astrology was applied in this like more heteronormative context, and in a popular context in this TV show.
Unfortunately, I would watch that immediately if it was like on Netflix.
If it was, I know. So, and it was fun to watch. I'm not hating on it. It was fun to watch. It's just interesting how astrology has been both deeply queer, but also applied in more heteronormative contexts.
That makes sense. So to bring us to the question of the podcast, but is it feminist? What would be your like 2-minute pitch for presenting astrology as something that's feminist? Or maybe you think it's not.
So, like most things, I think it can be feminist, but it can also be weaponized in ways that are not feminist. For me, in the way that I practice it, it is. And the astrologers who I follow are feminist and make an explicit connection. So, for example, there is a queer astrologer named Chani Nicholas. She has an app, actually, called the Chani app, CHANI, where you can read about your chart. You can read about the astrology happening around us and how it might influence us as a society. I highly recommend. She's an amazing astrologer, but I'm bringing her up because she describes Chani as a queer feminist-led team. And she often studies astrology to also understand socio-political happenings.
Interesting.
Not in a way that necessarily predicts what's going to happen, but in a way that helps give us context astrologically for why things might be happening and how to navigate them in ways that center on social justice. Another way I think she, as an astrologer and her team, apply feminism to their spiritual practices of astrology are they, as a team, have very like dedicated feminist principles in the way that they run their company, which I know sounds like company and feminist don't sound compatible, but I'm not talking about it in a girl boss feminism way. I'm talking about it in the way that everyone has to have a job to survive. And she happens to have created an astrology platform and has dedicated to providing everyone at least an $80K salary, which is more than we make, by the way.
Which is more than we make, by the way.
What else? I have this up because I wanted to bring it up. Their employees get unlimited menstrual leave, meaning like people who have periods who are suffering from it in any way, shape, or form get leave, paid leave.
That's great.
What else? Let me find it. Like great benefits, 4-day work week, leave for gender-based violence that's paid and protected. Just all of these, I think, intentional practices that center on equity as much as possible and supporting marginalized people. I know that even in their hiring practices, they are intentional about creating an intentionally diverse community. And so to me, these are practices that are compatible with feminism and the way that they even run this astrology app and company. But and so in that way, I think we can follow suit in whatever, paths we are on. How can we activate feminist principles? And whatever we do with astrology, one of the ways that I think it can be feminist is treating it as a tool to, again, understand ourselves better and understand each other better with the goal of collectively building a better world. For me, and I think many others, astrology is not a selfish practice. It is a practice that helps us get to know ourselves better, but it's not rooted in how can we, get ahead in a capitalist way. It's how can I get to know myself better so that I show up for the world better and I can show up for my community better. And I think that's how a lot of people I know approach astrology. So that's like the more serious side. I also think it's just fun. And patriarchy doesn't like it when women have fun or people have fun in a world that's dominated by competition and capitalism and hierarchy, and there's not a lot of appreciation for levity or anything that distracts us from being a cog in the machine, And so in that regard, I think we can activate it in a feminist way by resisting that patriarchal expectation of only being products of this larger system that is built on our labor being exploited to serve an elite class. And that sounds still maybe serious. And I don't think everyone who has fun with astrology is necessarily like consciously making that connection, but I think that connection is there. On the other hand, I can see how astrology may be used in anti-feminist ways if people approach it as a practice that is a script, that is fixed. So people might say, for example, women who are this sign or element in an essentialist way behave this way and this way only. Like I can see how it could be it could reinforce biological determinist and essentialist descriptions of gender. And I think in some of the more popular platforms that have included astrology, like those magazines, they might approach it in that way. And in that sense, I don't think that's necessarily compatible with feminism if you are perpetuating essentialist tropes about the sexes, about gender, or otherwise using it in a way that doesn't operate from a lens of nuance and understanding complexity. Nor do I think it's feminist to necessarily rely on astrology to or attempt to rely on astrology to get ahead in some way, or like I don't think it's necessarily compatible with capitalism. That's not to say that people who are astrologers or practitioners in astrology don't deserve to get paid for the work that they do, but rather exploiting it solely for capitalist reasons, I don't think that's feminist, personally. So all of that to say, I think it can definitely be feminist. And I also think people can weaponize it in ways that aren't feminist. For me, though, personally, it is feminist in my life.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of like letting things be joyful and exist just because they are, and letting ourselves have fun as a big middle finger to the capitalist heteropatriarchy.
Yeah, especially because I think astrology is often regarded as frivolous in a negative way, and like, oh, that's not serious. It's called a pseudoscience. I don't know if we talked about this, but astrology is very feminized.
Yeah.
In the way that witchcraft is, and it being associated with witchcraft derogatorily. And so in a patriarchal world, a lot of men are conditioned to stray away from astrology. And I think a lot of practitioners of astrology tend to be women. There are men who are astrologers and who partake in astrology as well, but I feel like they're not conditioned to, because it's such a feminized spiritual practice, even though it's for everyone. So there's that dimension too.
I'm trying to imagine the Cosmo Girl equivalent of the glossy horoscope on the back page and like GQ or
And it would
something.
be like, how to get ahead, how to dominate with
Looking to
your chart.
dominate this season, Pisces.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Meagan, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation that I will constantly be thinking about. I know this, like, when I say haunt, I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, like, a good haunting. Like, I'll be thinking about this conversation for years to come. You're the best. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.